On behalf of the Crossroads Cultural Center of Houston and the University of St. Thomas Office of Academic Affairs, Center of Faith and Culture, and Center for International Studies, we welcome you to tonight's event, Either We Depend on God or on Power, the Case of the Arab Spring. To those who are at one of these events for the first time, a little bit about us. Crossroads Cultural Center is a non-profit organization that was born over 8 years ago in New York. Crossroads Houston was founded 3 years ago by a small group of friends with a passion for cultural work. Our desire is to create a place where people from all backgrounds can meet and share an interest in every aspect of reality. We are interested in the events that shape our world because what happens always contains a suggestion, a hint that may affect and change our lives. Tonight's discussion is about the events in Arab countries and the role of religion in the fight for freedom. The cry for freedom, more freedom, seems to be the catalyst of the struggles and conflicts taking place in the Arab countries. Entire populations were ready to risk their lives in the name of it. What is the origin of this desire and thirst, to the point that it is preferred over life itself? How does religion influence freedom? Does religion limit or restrict personal and social freedom? Does religion tame freedom? Is religion an ally or enemy of power? Recent events in the Arab countries prompt these important questions of freedom and faith. Now let me turn the program over to our friend, Dr. Dominic Aquila, who will welcome all of us.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dominic Aquila, the Academic Vice President of the University of St. Thomas, and I welcome you here to Jones Hall for another of our Crossroads event. This one, as Christina has said, is sponsored by Crossroads, the Office of Academic Affairs, the Center for Faith and Culture on our campus, and our Center for International Studies. You can see that so many partners in a project like this. This is characteristic of the kind of work we like to do at the University of St. Thomas, where we integrate, collaborate, and cooperate. The outcome of that is almost always superlative. I welcome you this evening for an especially important conference on one of the most important events in the world that we have seen over the past year. It cuts, as Christina said, right to the heart of any of us who are serious about the relationship of our faith to culture and our everyday lives. We've assembled quite a panel for you this evening, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it and come away refreshed and your lives enriched. So thank you very much for being here, and enjoy the conference.
Now we'll turn the program over to our friend Melissa Marschall, who will introduce our program and distinguished speakers.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. Tonight we're examining the question of the Arab Spring. In particular, we want to understand what drove the people of these states to stand up against their governments. What inspired them to speak out against injustice, repression, and discrimination? And perhaps most importantly, what motivated them to engage in sustained acts that were both costly and risky? But before we turn to the specific case of the Arab Spring, I wanted to begin tonight's program by looking at the questions of protest and collective action more generally. As the images you were looking at previously remind us, the pro-democracy movements we've been witnessing over the past months are not unique. Throughout history, we've seen citizens of many nations rise up and revolt. We've seen civil rights movements overturn laws and political systems that disenfranchised blacks for decades. And we've seen protest movements that swept across entire regions to bring down the Iron Curtain and end the Cold War. In this broader context, though, the questions are the same. Why did they do it? What kept them going? What do these people desire? What do they want to change? And what is their vision for the future? For political scientists, which is what I am, these are not new questions. Indeed, we've long sought to understand the nature, causes, and consequences of political behavior, collective action, and governance across both time and space. Yet the events of the Arab Spring cannot be fully explained by social science theories. Indeed, research by scholars like Mansur Olson and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman would predict that these kinds of behaviors are quite unlikely. Our tendency as humans to be risk-averse makes us very cautious and wary of change. That said, research on motivation points to 4 critical factors in explaining protest behavior. These include social identity, social cognition, emotions, and value or belief systems. Of these, the last one is particularly associated with the success of social movements. Research suggests that sustaining collective action requires more than emotion and the requisite social infrastructure. So I draw your attention to this because tonight's event is a provocation to consider this point in particular. What is the system of beliefs for the protesters in Egypt and other Arab states? Is it a specific ideology? Is it a religion? Is it something else? And what role has this set of beliefs played in the events of the Arab Spring? Before I turn it over to tonight's speakers, I want to conclude my introductory comments with a historical witness of this provocation. It is the first passage of the Declaration of Independence, which was adopted unanimously by the original 13 U.S. states on July 4th, 1776. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to this separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish them, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. And now I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. We have with us first Richard Sindelar. He's Professor of American Foreign Policy and Foreign Affairs at the Center for International Studies here at the University of St. Thomas, and a partner in the law firm of Jackson Walker LLP. He received his undergraduate degree in International Affairs from Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, and his law degree from Georgetown University's Law Center. Mr. Sindelar served 23 years as a diplomatic officer with the U.S. State Department Foreign Service. In Washington, he served 3 tours analyzing Middle East politics and 2 tours in the Consular Affairs Bureau's office. Our second speaker tonight is Wael FAROUQ. Professor FAROUQ was born in Cairo, Egypt. He was Assistant Professor of Islamic Studies at the Copto-Catholic Faculty of Theology in Cairo from 2005 to 2008. And has been a visiting professor at the Faculty of Law, Marschall University in Italy since 2005, and professor at the Arab Language Institute at the American University in Cairo since 2006. He's a columnist for several Arab and Italian newspapers and magazines, and president of the Tassoul Cultural Center for Intercivilization Dialogue. So I'd like to turn it over now to Mr. Sindelar.
Thank you, Dr. Marschall. Welcome, everybody. My job tonight is to kind of paint a background picture, like painting the wall so that we can hear Wael FAROUQ give witness to his own personal experiences in Tahrir Square. As I was telling him, I've seen Tahrir Square but over 30 years ago now, so it's completely different. It was a bit desolate when I saw it. Mainly used for the fellahin who worked in Cairo to sleep in the square overnight. Now course, it's the epicenter of an entire movement that is shaking the Arab world. I want to look back and perhaps ask some questions about the future in terms of the Arab Spring. First of all, a year into this, the Arab Spring has turned into a hotter Arab summer, but the key two words I think that we need to bear in mind as we look at the Arab Spring is hope and optimism. The genie is not going back into the bottle. It is going to be a messy situation, and anybody who follows day to day what's happening in the Arab world in the various countries, it's a very uneven process that is happening there now. But over time, we are going to see a decidedly different Middle East. It is a watershed, a bit like the end of World War II completely changed Europe. I think the Arab Spring will eventually completely change the Arab world as well. Well, where did it come from? Again, we probably have, as I say, more questions than answers as to exactly where it came from. Scholars such as Dr. Marschall and Wael FAROUQ will study it at greater length. I'm going to paint a couple thoughts out there, some questions, and then we'll see what you all think of the situation. First of all, I would say that in some ways the Arab Spring was born out of a relatively good success story in the Middle East, and that's education. Since World War II, there's been a great rise in the number of educated people who, because of their education, get hopes, aspirations, have the talent to make a difference and to make a change. The less good news is that those talented people and educated people, as we discovered with the poor gentleman in Tunisia who burned himself to death, he had an engineering degree. He was reduced to selling fruit in a square for which he didn't have a proper license, and ended up running up yet again to one of the several relatively oppressive regimes in the Middle East, and he ended up making his statement by committing suicide by fire in Tunisia, and that sparked the process. The less good news is we have this educated group of people, but they have no real hope and they have no real expectations because the old regimes serve the elite and not the people. And because of that, there were not opportunities, and opportunities mean jobs, and opportunities mean the right to contribute. And in the Middle East, especially, it means the right to get married and raise a family, but you have to have hope before anybody will give you their daughter as a bride. So there were a lot of people who simply could not aspire to anything good. It triggered in Tunisia, it came to Tahrir Square, and the accelerant, one of the accelerants at the time was the social media. I don't think we can minimize how much your generation, for the younger students here, I talk to my classes a lot about this, the social media acts as an accelerant to any issue. Joseph Nye of Harvard talks of it as the issues come at policymakers and regimes thicker and quicker. They don't have time to react. They don't have time to dampen issues that pop up, and they come at them in such a massive way that they're hard-pressed to deal with them, and what happens is regimes fall. So that was one accelerant. Another accelerant, getting back to that education, was the fact that finally, because of the social media, because of the internet, because of a general move over 20 and 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union toward democracy worldwide, these people wanted democratization, and they wanted to have the right to govern themselves. Will that government, a question we have is, will that government be Western-like? Probably not. It's going to be entirely different, but at least they may get a chance to vote. Some skeptics talk about one man, one vote, one time being the Algerian model, where fundamentalist Islam is involved. We'll have to see in Egypt. That's an open question we don't know. Could democracy fade away once the new regime comes in? Hard to say. That's an open question. That's a future that you all will deal with in the years ahead. Another question, another driving force behind this, I believe, was women. Women have not had a major role generally in the Middle East, but again, education has given them aspirations, has given them a sense of equality, and they took a very big part in what happened in Tahrir Square. U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia was on campus this morning, and he was explaining that even though there was not a violent Arab Spring in Saudi Arabia, it's his view that there was nevertheless an element of Arab Spring there as well, because there was pressure for change on the regime, one of those being on behalf of women. About 50% of the people being graduated from Saudi universities now are women, according to the ambassador. And those people are going to have those same aspirations that the Egyptians had and the Tunisian engineer has, so those are going to force the system. So I think over time, we're going to see hope and optimism prevail. There are going to be downsides periodically. Syria is an example of where things are not going well. It's an example where the regime may hang on. However, I think, again, with the Arab Spring, as an old foreign policy analyst for the State Department, I would say Arab Spring-like that I could almost guarantee, be willing to bet you money, that Bashar al-Assad will go and the regime will change. It's the nature of the way these things happen that he is on a downturn. He will go. Secretary Clinton seems to believe there may be a coup by the military. Will that change the regime? Maybe not. But we also won't have the same situation. Definitely the Arab Spring brings us change, and the question is, where does that change go? It will be messy from time to time, but overall, we should be optimistic, and I think Wael FAROUQ will speak more to that, and also how we can find some optimism and faith in the use of faith and reason to move forward in the Middle East. At that point, what I really came here today to do was not so much listen to myself talk, but to listen to Wael, who was there, explain what actually happened in Tahrir Square. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. FAROUQ.
Thank you for this exceptional view. Usually in Europe and the United States, I don't hear this kind of optimistic view of what is going on in Arab countries. Good evening.
Good evening.
2 years ago, President Obama visited Cairo to deliver his famous speech addressing the whole Islamic world from Cairo University, which used to be the gate of democracy and liberalism for the whole Arab world. After his visit, people imagined a dialogue, a conversation between President Obama and President Mubarak. In this conversation, President Mubarak asked President Obama, how much is the income of an average American citizen? President Obama said, around $5,000. President Mubarak asked him again, and how much does life cost for an average American citizen? President Obama said, around $3,000. Mubarak said, wow, and what they do with the rest of the difference, the $2,000? President Obama said, well, we are a liberal, democratic state. We don't ask our citizens what they do with their money. President Obama asked back President Mubarak, how much is the income of an average Egyptian citizen? President Mubarak said something like $300. President Obama asked him back, and how much does life cost? He said around $1,000. President Obama asked him, how does it come? From where they get this difference in money? President Mubarak said, okay, we are a liberal democratic state, we don't ask our citizens from where they get their money. Another Another story, not imaginary this time, personally happened to me when I bought my first car. I wanted to get a driving license. And for almost a year and a half, I was keeping, going almost every month, doing the test and fail. Doing the test and fail. While I was driving my car in Cairo. I wanted to have the license. And after, when I was very tired, a friend asked me, but listen, did you pay a bribe? I said to him, what? This is a crime, I can't do this. He said, okay, you will never have your driving license. I tried again and again, and I failed, and after I was convinced that I have to pay this bribe. But it was really very difficult for me to do, something like this. So what I did, I take something like $50, I throw them on the floor close to the employee, and I said to him, sir, you have dropped $50 on the floor. He looked to the $50 and looked back at me and said, I don't drop less than $100. Of course, it seems like a joke and funny, but for me at that time, it was not funny at all. I believe this joke introduced, in my opinion, the main reason of this revolution. I don't know how much do you know how to live against what you believe you are, against what you would like to be. This is very heavy, and a lot of these educated, talented people were suffering on everyday basis, living against and be forced to be not what they want to be. This was, in my opinion, the main reason. This is what pushed me to stay in the square. I was not revolting against a regime. I was revolting against a corruption in which I was forced to be involved. Of course, experts will tell us a lot of very correct information and facts about Egypt before the revolution. I'm not going to read for you, I'm just poverty, violence, all of this brutal practice, which very well known, was there. But it was not new in 2010. This kind of violence, poverty, suffering, all of these things have existed for almost 30 years, and some people say even for 60 years. Egyptian people used to be oppressed, used to live under dictatorship and tyranny for 60 years. What happened? What happened in 2010? What happened in 2010, as Professor Sindelar has mentioned, is this. Finally, we had a sort of upper middle class. These people were very well educated, were open to the world, and they were suffering, being something they hate. Of course, there was another thing very important, which was also social networks, and it made a very big change, because for first time people have lived the experience of the encounter. Egyptian people, according to emergency law, which was enforced for almost 60 years, Egyptian people were not more than 5 gathering together are subject to arrest, according to this law, more than 5 persons. So what happened in social networks, for the first time, thousands and thousands of people have met and have shared their suffering, their pain, their opinion, and their hopes. I agree with Professor Sandler that this revolution was not a revolution of anger, as they used to call it. Is a revolution of hope. People have revolted because they had hope, and they found during this encounter on social networks, they found their unity, and in this unity they found and they understood it's possible to make the change. How did this revolution happen? An accident, and again interaction between virtual world and what I call now traditional reality, because it was ongoing dialogue between virtual world and traditional reality. A young blogger who have filmed a police officer distributing drugs, put this video on the web, was beaten to death on the street as a punishment of his behavior. This have provoked a lot of people. A lot of people were extremely angry. And this person, this is this cartoon of him. This is, of course, the cartoon of President Mubarak, and of this young blogger. His name is Khalid Said. Immediately after his death, a web page was created called "We Are All Khalid Said." And this young man was the point of encounter of 650,000 persons. And these 650,000 persons have started a discussion. How should we respond to this violence? What should we do? And for the first time, somebody can say his opinion and feel that he is heard. You write a sentence and you receive 300, 400, or even 1,000 respond to what you say. So I am heard, I am vocal. So some people said we should, burn up this police station in which this officer was working. Some people said, no, we have to kill this officer. Some people, it was an ongoing conversation, but in this conversation, some people said, no, if we do evil, we will be like them. We should to respond to this evil by God. For this reason, they choose the January 25th, which used to be celebrated for almost 80 years as a police day. So they have chosen January 25th because it is the police day. And what did they do on the police day? They went to streets carrying in their hands flowers. And they started to handle flowers to police officers who were heavily armed to face this protest. It was a magical moment because I saw myself, police officers were confused, they were ready to beat, to shoot, but they found this young, educated people coming to them, giving them flowers and saying, we love you, and we belong to you, and you belong to us. You can't do this to us. So they were confused. The majority of Egyptian people who can walk kilometers to avoid passing by a police station were encouraged to join the marches of these young people. And it started to grow, and after police failed to contain the protest. People have occupied the square. After this, police forces received orders, they cannot stay in the square. Violence started against protesters in the night of January 25th. So this is what have started the revolution. And as we see, I don't want to say complicated things, but I believe this revolution have made or has a very special epistemological characteristic, because for first time with this revolution, time and the place changed from being a container of human action to be a subject of human action. This interaction between virtual world and the traditional reality have broken the barriers of time and place, and have learn these young people that we have to get back the time and the place. It's our time and it's our place. For this time, the Egyptian people, the Egyptian protesters, for first time, they started to give names for the days of the revolution. So each day of the revolution got its name. And when you give a name of the day, you give the day your identity. It is my time. Hundreds of these people were killed defending the square. Why? I mean, what is this square? I mean, it's just a square, but why they died? Because this square became a symbol of the place. It is our place. It's our space of freedom. And if this square was taken, this revolution would be the end of the revolution. Tahrir Square was one of these squares in Egypt, and this what gives the square power. The square was not isolated from the rest of Egypt. Everything was happening in the square was nothing but a concentration of the events all over Egypt, from north to south. People were demonstrating unity, solidarity between Muslims and the Christians. We are going to show this. Everything was taking place in this square was powerful, effective. Why? Not because media was concentrating on this square. No, because this square was a symbol of what was going on in the whole Egypt. We will see at the beginning of the revolution another very, very important characteristic of this revolution, usually not mentioned. This revolution, and even it's criticized because of this characteristic. This revolution, since the beginning, was not representing a political party, was not representing an ideology, was not representing group, was not led by a charismatic leader. Nothing led these hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, all over Egypt, but their faith. Only their faith and their desire of freedom was the leader. They didn't have another leader. And for this reason, the regime of Mubarak collapsed. Because they were faced by untraditional challenge. They used to face a charismatic leader. It's easy to distort his reputation, put him in jail, to kill him. Political party, it's easy to arrest the supporters of this party. They used to, but this time, what to do to face this strong desire of freedom, moving millions of people in the squares and the streets? How can you oppose such a thing? So the absence of ideology, the absence of political party, the absence of the charismatic leadership is a very positive sign. In fact, it is the only true sign of change, because this is a change. For first time, for whoever familiar with Arabic culture, I believe for first time in Arabic history, for first time, people stopped dreaming of the savior, of the tyrant who is coming to fill the earth, by justice instead of injustice. For first time, people are not waiting for somebody. For first time, faith and the desire of freedom was able to make hopes and dreams possible and real. And only because of these characteristics, I believe, for first time, women in Arab and the Islamic world, of course, here is, when I talk here about this, of course, there is always a stereotypes about, Muslim women and Arab women, like they cannot drive cars, they, suffer this FMG, they deprived of the right of education. All of this are facts and are true, but there is no one single Muslim woman suffers all of these things together, because in Cairo we are suffering because of women driving cars. Cairo they do. In Egypt, they suffer this female genital mutilation. But in Arabia, they are not practicing this bad habit. In Afghanistan, they are deprived of their rights of education. In Egypt, even 75% of the graduates of universities are females. So when I say Muslim women, still they have a lot of problems, but I don't want you to go to the common stereotypes about... we see here, these women were in the front lines of the revolution. You see, what kind of women? Not only like unveiled women or liberal, but also veiled women, Muslim women, Christian women. All types of women were in the front line of the revolution. For first time, we see women in front lines. Also, we see the flower was the language, with weapons. Always against a weapon, there is a flower. And it was very powerful, because this revolution has succeeded. Of course, this is, we call it millionaires. This is the march of millions. So the revolution was like these liberals, young liberals, also some Islamists were staying, few thousands, were keeping the square as a space of freedom. And they know the square was full of millions of people. Of course, the regime was desperate. They didn't know what to do, so they cannot open fire against the demonstrators. So they did as they used to do. They get some thugs, criminals, pay them and send them to kill these people in the square. And it's called the camel battle. Here also, this is the ethics, or as I call it, the utopia of Tahrir Square. In Tahrir Square, women were in front lines. Women were leading. It was amazing for me to see a group of Salafi, and Salafi are like ultra-Orthodox Muslims, sitting, listening to unveiled girl preaching them about what to do to make this revolution successful. Usually, these people believe that the voice of woman is not permitted to be heard. And they were sitting, listening to women preaching. Here we see, I don't know if you can see on this hand, you see the cross. Egyptian Christians are very proud of their religion, so all Christians in Egypt, they put this tattoo of the cross on their hands, as a part of the baptism. So we see here in the square, in this space of freedom, Christian bodies were the mosque, and the Muslim bodies were the church. To allow Muslims to pray, Christians make these walls to determine the space of the mosque on Friday. On Sunday, Muslim did the same. So in Tahrir Square, Christian bodies were the mosque, Muslim bodies were the church. And here also we see fancy sunglasses. And this gives indication of whom have started this revolution. He is praying, so he has faith. And what he has on his sunglasses, the symbol of Islam and the Christianity, the unity. So this says it was not anger, because anger doesn't build solidarity. The anger burns, never built. So we see here, this is very important for me to understand. It was not poverty, it was not oppression. It's faith and the desire of freedom. We see here a lot of images of this kind of unity. Of course, in the square, people were sleeping in this kind of things, January, and the weather of Cairo is mostly like the weather here. but still in January at night it's extremely cold, at least for Egyptians. So this is how people were eating and drinking. You see, everybody was giving something. And I remember somebody, hundreds of thousands are, are sitting in the square. And they are, surrounded not by police, but by these thugs. And also by secret police who used to kidnap the activists whenever they go out of the square. So a lot of people, in order to support the sit-in the square, they used to buy food. Even some pieces of bread and some cheese, and they distribute it. So she's not, from her dress and the appearance, she's not rich woman, she's poor woman. But she managed to buy some tomato, some cheese, and some bread for people are sitting there. And the people are sitting there. Somebody's offered a sandwich, and he said, no, I give it to somebody else. Say, why? He said, I'm not hungry now, but you might be hungry after 2-3 hours. He said, yes, but there might be a person hungry now. And in Egypt, whoever visits Cairo, you see, we have everything that's like a competition. You have to fight to get what you want. This fighting culture disappeared in the square, and there was solidarity. This was the hospital of the square, where young doctors, the students of medicine school, they built this, and of course they collected donations, to make this school to treat people who were wounded because of the attacks. Of course, social networks and cell phones was the key word of this revolution. So they needed energy, and they were very creative to get in the square sources of this energy, as you can see. Cairo, look, this is Tahrir Square. Cairo, maybe Professor Sindelar can witness this, one of the most dirty cities in the world. Why? And that's very, when you enter an Egyptian house, it's extremely clean. When you go out to street, it's extremely dirty. Why? Because people, they don't feel they own the country. I own my house, it's my space, so it's clean. But street, it's not mine. People used to, this is the street of government. So people, but in the square, because people own the square, look, this is a square after, the morning after a march of million. How it's clean. Art, of course, and the beauty had a corner. Martyrs, also, to be remembered. They had their memorial in the square. This image, it might irritate a lot of Muslims, because women are not allowed to pray in the first line or shoulder to shoulder to men. But in the square, you see, women are in the front line. Of course, I'm not saying this is correct according to Islam, but I'm saying women, for first time, were not a sexual object or subject. Were a protagonist, were partners. And this is a prayer. This is a holy moment for Muslims. And we see women are in first line. This is the ethics of the square. Egyptians are very funny people. So some people, when they get married, they want to take photo in front of a huge church, but Egyptian people used to take photos in front of tanks around the square. So, of course, and this is music and art. Cleaning. And this was the paradise of the square. The 18 days we have lived. Everybody felt danger, risking his life, but was extremely happy and was fulfilling really his existence as a human being. After revolution, a lot of people were disappointed and became pessimistic, including myself. I was very disappointed. Why? Because after revolution, the former regime, this is a photo of Mubarak, but was photoshopped. They added to him this black sign, which is the sign of the very conservative Muslims who pray a lot. So They had this flag. So they said, okay, now we have again the Mubarak regime, but with the beard. Because they understood that this kind of agreement between Islamists and the Mubarak regime. But people never left the squares and never left the streets. And it was amazing. I took this photo because this was a referendum of March 19th. And in this referendum, for first time, usually the percentage of voters was between 7 and 13%. This was 65% of voters went to vote. And you see what kind of lines. People spend, a whole day waiting for their turn to vote. And, Facebook, the next day was not Facebook, was Fingerbook, because everybody voted, and there was this phosphoric ink. He put his finger instead of his face. So it was Fingerbook, not Facebook that day. So for me, this is a continuation of, a continuity of the revolution. This is a huge change. People started to be involved in politics. This never happened. After 1 month from now, we have the presidential election, and for first time, 7,000 years ago, we don't know the future president or ruler of Egypt. No one, even here in the United States, which used to have the... no one knows who is going to be the president of Egypt after almost a month from now. For first time, this is a huge change. Of course, everybody say the Arab Spring was turned into an Islamic winter. And this is true, because after revolution, the young people who have made this revolution, they wanted a democracy. But they found these people coming from nowhere. Of course, they didn't participate in the revolution at the beginning. But suddenly they came and they jumped on the revolution, and theocracy is becoming, the potential possibility of the Egyptian future. But this cartoon is very, very significant. Why very significant? Because we see here, we have the pyramid, and the top of the pyramid is going to change the appearance of the country. This is exactly the history of Egyptian modernity in last 100 years. Because the modernity in Egyptian history was usually adopted by secular democratic state, but was always serving a dictatorship. And in this, religion was always used by official religious institutions to justify the tyranny and the dictatorship. For this reason, yes, this is the Egyptian culture. It's this mix between what is modern and what is traditional. I am not against modernity, and I am very much for my tradition. But unfortunately, this mix is mix of the worst elements of modernity together with the worst elements of tradition. And this is the real crisis we are facing. People, of course, the square was full of people, as you have seen in these photos. These very same people who were backing liberals, young liberals in the square, risking their lives under the slogans of democracy and liberalism, these very same people have voted for Islamists after revolution. And everybody, how does it come? How does it come? The same person risk his life for democracy and after vote for Islamists. It's not strange, because a modern discourse with a traditional content is not very much different from a traditional discourse with a modern appearance. The Islamists have run this election under the title, the Democratic Coalition, the Muslim Brotherhood and some other parties. The title was Democratic Coalition. So we have this overlapping, discourse overlapping. And unfortunately, it's the worst elements of both. And this explains a lot of frustrations of what happened after this revolution. A lot of people in Egypt believe that the former regime is still ruling the country. Mubarak have stepped down, but a lot of people believe that this CAF, the Supreme Council of Forced Arms, are still serving the former regime because the body of former regime is still functioning in the same way. The budget of a state, for example, it was copy-paste from the budget of a state done by Mubarak a few months before. And a lot of things, I will not read everything, but there is a lot of reasons and behaviors and actions done by the SCAF to prove this point of view that the former regime is still ruling the country. And a lot of people say the SCAF were not able to open fire against the demonstrators because at that moment Egyptian army will be divided. And this is something very good was done by Mubarak and the Sadat. And the Egyptian army is not an army of religion or minority or class. Or Egyptian army is representing Egyptian people. So for this, very difficult that this great army is going to against the people. But the head of the army, they might do. So we see the officers who were accused of killing the protesters, the peaceful protesters, they are leaving prisons, and the demonstrators are going to prison. For first time in Egyptian history, we had 25,000 women together marching in the streets for women's rights. And if you look to faces and the dressing, most of them are very ordinary Egyptian women. And this scarf doesn't mean that they are close-minded or no. For first time, women became vocal and they did this march in the street because now there is a risk to deprive women from what they have achieved in the last few years. This is my last point, and I saved a lot of things for your interest and curiosity. Of course, the former regime is still ruling the country, and they have developed their strategies to oppress and exhaust and end this revolution. But also, the peaceful protesters have developed their means and the tools to keep the revolution alive. A lot of Egyptian people who have voted for the coalition between Islamists and army, or the SCAF, they didn't have access to virtual world. What the activists did, they started to take the virtual world to reality. Get a projector and a white screen, and they show what they film, the reality they capture to people, and you see the reaction of people. So more and more people are getting involved in what is happening. And this was a movement was taking place at the same time in 16 different Egyptian cities. This campaign showing what the army did, what the revolution for, and what is happening now. A lot of special forces were, evacuating the square in a violent way, and they were shooting and killing some activists. Activists were shooting also, were shooting back, but by camera. So the special forces shoot by guns and they shoot by camera because they film the faces of the officers and they put it on a website, so they bear the moral consequence of their action, the burden of their evil. They have to face their children, their families, by the evil they are doing. For this reason, I still insist the biggest victory of this revolution is a moral victory. A lot of people are scared of Islamists. We are not. In fact, Mubarak and the former regime tried to keep Islamists alive all the time to justify their dictatorship. They are a risk, they are dangerous. So United States and Europe, they close their eyes of what is happening in Egypt because there is an Islamic danger. So after revolution, there was like a proposal for liberals. Now there is an Islamic danger, what we do? These young revolutionaries said no. Egyptian people voted for Islamists and they were demonstrating, protesting against the military council to handle the power for Islamists. Because we respect the principles, regardless parties or persons or whatever. So, this is another video also about marches, night marches, to very poor neighborhoods in Cairo, to get these people involved and not deceived by what they hear in official media. So, after revolution now, 47% of the people who have voted for Islamists in former parliamentary election, they said we are not going to vote for them again. Why? Because they understood. Being an Islamist, of course, is not something bad, but it doesn't mean you are an angel. So when you are a politician, when you practice power, you are a human being. So the claim of being uncorrupted, untouchable, angels are going to rule the country, it collapsed because of many stories and many things took place. After revolution, resulted 47 of people. They said we are not going to vote for an Islamist party again. Most of people, they are not going to vote, and I tell you now, I am sure, I don't know who will be the president, but I am sure the candidate of Muslim Brotherhood is not going to be the president. And remember what I say to you now. Because people have seen and people have understood. It's a big lie, this legacy. They have the right. Before revolution, when we were organizing events, we insist to invite them to be present and to practice their right of free speech. So I'm not against them. I'm not against the persons, even if I don't agree, because in my opinion, they have turned religion into an ideology. And there is nothing, in my opinion, more awful than this. But I deeply believe that the biggest enemy of extremism is freedom. Only freedom can end the extremism. And this is what is happening now in Egypt. A lot of people usually ask me, what can we do? What can we do to support this noble revolution? And I always say to my European and American friends, the biggest help you can offer to us is to be true to the values of your religion and civilization. Because one of the biggest risks we face in Cairo is losing the credibility of the values of freedom and the human rights, which are supposed to be embodied here. So this is the biggest thing you can do for us, is to be true to these principles and the values which inspired this revolution. Thank you very much. Just 2 months before the Egyptian revolution, and also it's in the context, we have organized something called the Meeting in Cairo. We were inspired by a similar event used to take place in Italy for more than 30 years called Meeting Rimini, sponsored by a Catholic movement called communion and liberation. I personally had, and many of my friends, they have friendship with this movement, and we were inspired by their experience of creating a space for people, different people, to meet and to talk together. And this was exactly October 29th and 31st. So it was exactly less than 2 months before the revolution. So this meeting, as it was stated by some Egyptian writers after, it was one of the signs of this revolution, because this meeting, which people estimated like it cost like millions of Egyptian pounds, it didn't cost us anything, because thanks to hundreds of volunteers who were willing to do something. And this is, they were restless. They want to do something. So we had, like, whoever has a car, he worked as a chauffeur in his car. So we solved the problem of transportation without paying $1. Everybody gave his laptop, so we had like a huge international press center without paying anything, and everything was happening like this. So in fact, this meeting in Cairo, I believe it's related from this perspective to this revolution. And to the basic idea, which the most beautiful thing I have seen in this meeting, Rimini, this idea of encounter as a way of knowledge, as a cognitive method. This encounter in Tahrir Square is what changed Egypt and made this revolution able to live under this pressure for almost 2 years now. The initial plan to handle the power to civilians supposed to be by December 2013. But the pressure of young people in squares have shortened this to June 2012. This is not reported in newspapers. This is not reported in media. But these young people are very powerful. And every true change and the positive change that took place in Egypt was under the pressure of the demonstrators in the square. So this encounter, which, you see human bodies, was, like sacred places, mosques, and that's why, because for the first time, Muslims and the Christians met and shared something. And they started to know the human dimension of each other. Before the revolution, it was very easy to meet somebody who said to you, I hate Christians, or I hate Muslims. And then when you ask him, give me a name, he has no name. Because Christian or Muslim is a stereotype, has no face. In the square, in the encounter, everything human got a face and a body. And in fact, this was the biggest achievement of our meeting in Cairo, which is going to take place again in November 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th. And in first meeting in Cairo, we were asked to accept the sponsorship of very important people. And we said no, because this was the work of volunteers. If we put these huge names, it means these volunteers did nothing. So we received the message, this is first and the last meeting in Cairo. 2 months after we had the revolution, the whole former regime, they left power, and the second meeting in Cairo is this year. So, God works in mysterious ways.
From the audience, if anyone has a question.
What are the other political parties that are not Islamic?
Yes, I will say. Okay, there is many parties. I didn't speak about all details, but there was also a liberal coalition. But this liberal coalition, at the time of election, were 7 months old, while the Islamist parties are 80 years old. And they had an embassy in each street of Cairo, a mosque, where they can meet and preach and get the support of people. So yes, there was even revolutionary parties, and they made a miracle, in my opinion, because after 7 months, and you can get 18% of the votes, this is a huge thing, in my opinion. And I believe in future it will be even higher.
Past revolutions have shown that even if people get knocked around, until the standard of living drops enough, there still won't be a revolution. So suppose a power vacuum is filled by an authoritarian government that abuses human rights, but it provides a strong infrastructure, say in the vein of China, and the people, while they're knocked around, don't feel the need to throw a revolution because the new government takes advantage of industrialization and really makes people profit. Even though they're getting knocked around, say like China, they don't feel like throwing a revolution. Are you worried about this happening?
Okay, this is what I was trying to explain in my talk, is the change which took place in Egypt. It's not a change in regime, because we believe the former regime is still ruling, as I said. The true change that took place is a change in human beings and the human heart. The people who have started this revolution, like myself,